James Harrison stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse, watching the city lights twinkle below like fallen stars. At 32, he had built a technology empire worth billions, but tonight felt like the loneliest man. In New York, his phone buzzed with the familiar tone reserved for family calls. "James, darling, we need to talk," came the crisp voice of his grandmother, Victoria Harrison. Even at 75, she commanded respect and fear in equal measure throughout their family's business empire. "What is it now, grandmother?" James sighed, loosening his Italian silk tie. "I had just returned from another 14-hour day of board meetings and negotiations. The board is getting restless about your personal life. A 32-year-old bachelor running a family company doesn't inspire confidence in our traditional investors. You need a wife, and you need one soon." James felt his jaw tighten. This conversation had been brewing for months. "I don't have time for relationships, and you know it. The company requires my full attention." "Then make time." Victoria's voice turned steel cold. "I've arranged several suitable matches from prominent families. Ladies who understand the requirements of being a Harrison wife." "Absolutely not." James walked to his home bar and poured himself a scotch. "I won't marry some society princess who sees me as a walking bank account. Then find someone yourself. You have 6 months, James. After that, I'll make the choice for you. And trust me, you won't like my selection." The line went dead, leaving James staring at his phone in frustration. He had worked too hard to let anyone else control his life, but Victoria Harrison wasn't someone to cross lightly. She still held significant shares in Harrison Technologies and enough influence to make his life difficult. An unexpected encounter 3 weeks later, James found himself in an unlikely place for a billionaire CEO. His driver had gotten lost in Brooklyn, and James had stepped out to get his bearings when he noticed a small art gallery tucked between a coffee shop and a bookstore. Something about the vibrant paintings in the window drew him inside. The gallery was tiny, but filled with remarkable artwork. Paintings that seemed to capture raw human emotion in bold strokes and brilliant colors. As James studied a particularly striking piece depicting a woman's silhouette against a stormy sky, a voice behind him spoke. "That one's called Waiting for Tomorrow. It's about hope persisting even in the darkest moments." James turned to see a young woman with paint-stained fingers and the most genuine smile he had encountered in years. She wore a simple sundress and had her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, with a few rebellious strands framing her face. There was something refreshingly real about her, so different from the polished socialites he usually met. "The artist has real talent," James said. Studying the painting again, "These pieces speak to something deeper than mere decoration." The woman's eyes lit up with surprise and pleasure. "Thank you. That means a lot coming from someone who clearly appreciates art." She gestured to his expensive suit and watch. "Sophie Chen, and these are actually my paintings." "James," he replied, deliberately omitting his last name. "You created all of these?" Sophie nodded, her cheeks flushing slightly pink. "This is my first real gallery showing. I've been working toward this moment for 5 years, painting in my tiny apartment after my day job." As they talked, James found himself genuinely relaxed for the first time in months. Sophie spoke passionately about her art, her dreams of making a living from her creativity, and her struggles to balance pursuing her passion with paying bills. She had no idea who he was, treating him like any other visitor to her gallery. "Would you like to see my favorite piece?" Sophie asked, leading him to a smaller painting in the corner. "I call it Love Unexpected. It's about how the most beautiful things in life often come when we least expect them." The painting showed 2 figures meeting in a garden, their faces turned toward each other with expressions of wonder and discovery. Something about it made James's chest tighten in an unfamiliar way. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "Do you believe that? That love can be unexpected?" Sophie studied his face, noting the sadness that flickered in his dark eyes. "I have to believe it. Otherwise, what's the point of staying open to possibilities?" Their conversation was interrupted when an older man with graying hair and tired eyes entered the gallery, moving slowly with the help of a walking cane. "Dad, you should be resting." Sophie said, hurrying to his side with concern evident in her voice. I wanted to see your big day, sweetheart, David Chen replied, his voice weak but proud. These paintings are magnificent. You've inherited your mother's gift. James watched the tender interaction between father and daughter, noting the man's pale complexion and labored breathing. It was clear he was seriously ill, and equally clear how much Sophie loved him. Mr. Chen, your daughter is incredibly talented, James said, extending his hand. David shook it gratefully. She is indeed. I just wish I could do more to support her dreams. Medical bills have a way of consuming everything, even dreams, like Sophie's. Face tightened with worry and embarrassment. Dad, please don't worry about that now. Focus on getting better. James felt something shift inside his chest as he watched. Sophie's obvious devotion to her father and her struggle to remain positive. Despite their financial difficulties, an idea began forming in his mind, crazy and impulsive, but potentially perfect. The unexpected proposal over the next week. James found himself returning to Sophie's gallery every day, always during his lunch break, when he should have been in meetings. He told himself he was simply appreciating art, but the truth was more complicated. Sophie's genuine warmth and passionate spirit had awakened. Something in him that he thought his demanding career had killed. Sophie looked forward to his visits too, though she couldn't understand why this mysterious, well-dressed man seemed so interested in her work and her thoughts. Her conversations ranged from art to philosophy to dreams for the future. She found herself sharing things she had never told anyone. And James surprised himself by opening up about the pressures of his work and his loneliness despite his success. You never talk about your family, Sophie observed one afternoon, as they sat in the small cafe next to her gallery. James stirred his coffee thoughtfully. My family is complicated. Lots of expectations and traditions that don't always align with personal happiness. That sounds lonely, Sophie said softly. It is, James admitted, meeting her eyes. Until recently, I thought that was just the price of success. Their moment was interrupted when Sophie's phone rang. She answered quickly, her face growing pale. As she listened, yes, I understand. Thank you for calling. She hung up, her hands trembling slightly. What's wrong? James asked immediately. My father's doctor. Treatments aren't working as well as they hoped. There's a new experimental therapy available, but our insurance won't cover it. It costs more money than I could make in 5 years. Watched tears fill Sophie's eyes as she struggled to maintain her composure. In that moment, his crazy idea crystallized into a concrete plan. Sophie, I have a proposition for you, he said carefully. It's going to sound insane, but I need you to hear me out. She looked at him with confusion and growing curiosity. I need a wife, James said simply. Not for love or romance, but for business reasons that are too complicated to explain right. Now, it would be a marriage of convenience, lasting 1 year. In exchange, I would cover all of your father's medical expenses and pay you enough money to pursue your art full-time for the rest of your life. Sophie stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. Are you serious? You're proposing? Marriage to someone you've known for a week? I know it sounds crazy, James continued urgently, but think about it logically. You need money for your father's treatment, and I need a wife who won't expect romantic love or try to change my life. We could help each other. You're absolutely insane, Sophie said, standing up from the table. I don't even know your last name, and you're asking me to marry you for money. What kind of person do you think I am? Someone who loves her father. Enough to consider all options, James replied gently. Someone brave enough to have her first art show in a tiny Brooklyn gallery. Someone genuine enough to treat a stranger with kindness without knowing anything about his bank account. Sophie paced to the window, her mind racing. Everything logical told her to run away from this mysterious man and his impossible proposal. But the image of her father's tired face and the doctor's grave voice kept echoing in her mind. If I were to consider this madness, she said slowly, not looking at him, what exactly would you expect from me? Attend social functions with me? Live in my apartment for appearances? Present ourselves as a happily married couple in public? After 1 year, we divorce quietly, and you're free to live your life however you choose. Sophie turned back to face him, studying his serious expression. And you would really pay for my father's treatment. All of it? The money would be transferred to the hospital today if you agree. No strings attached, regardless of what you decide about the marriage. The generous offer without conditions told Sophie something important about this man's character. Even if his proposal was completely insane. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course. But Sophie, there's one more thing you should know before you decide. James reached into his wallet and handed her a business card. Sophie looked down at the elegant card and felt her world. Tilt James Harrison, CEO Harrison Technologies? She looked up at him with wide eyes. You're that James Harrison? The billionaire? I should have told you sooner, but I enjoyed being treated like a normal person for once. Sophie sank back into her chair, overwhelmed. This is really happening. A billionaire just proposed a marriage of convenience to pay for my father's medical bills. I feel like I'm living in a romance novel. Will you consider it? James asked quietly. Sophie looked into his dark eyes, seeing something vulnerable beneath his confident exterior. Against all logic and reason, she found herself nodding. I'll give you my answer tomorrow, she whispered, her life about to change forever. As James left the cafe that evening, both he and Sophie wondered if they were about to make the biggest mistake of their lives or discover something neither of them expected to find. The Harrison penthouse felt like stepping into another universe. Sophie stood in the marble foyer, clutching her single suitcase, while James's housekeeper, Maria Santos, bustled around making arrangements. The older woman had kind eyes and a warm smile that immediately put Sophie at ease. Welcome home, Mrs. Harrison, Maria said, taking Sophie's coat. Mr. James has prepared the guest suite for you. It has its own bathroom and sitting area for privacy. Sophie glanced at James, who was reviewing documents on his phone even during this momentous occasion. Thank you, Maria. And please, just call me Sophie. Maria's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise, but she nodded with approval. Of course, Miss Sophie. Do you like me to show you around? As they toured the sprawling apartment, Sophie felt increasingly overwhelmed. The living room alone was larger than her entire Brooklyn apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of Central Park, and every piece of furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. This is your room, Maria announced, opening double doors to reveal a suite that took Sophie's breath away. The bedroom was decorated in soft blues and creams, with a king-sized bed, sitting area, and doors leading to a private balcony. It's beautiful, Sophie whispered, setting her suitcase on the plush carpet. But it doesn't feel real. Mr. James wanted you to be comfortable, Maria said gently. He's not as cold as he pretends to be, you know. In the 5 years I've worked here, I've never seen him care enough about anyone to redecorate a room. Sophie looked at the woman with surprise. He redecorated this for me? Every detail. He even asked what colors might make an artist feel inspired. Maria smiled knowingly. That man hasn't shown interest in anyone's comfort but his own since I've known him. Later that evening, Sophie found James in his home office, still working despite the late hour. The room was all dark wood and leather, very masculine and intimidating. He looked up when she knocked on the doorframe. How are you settling in? He asked, saving his work and giving her his attention. It's overwhelming, Sophie admitted, entering the room. Maria told me you redecorated the guest room. James's cheeks colored slightly. I wanted you to feel comfortable. This arrangement will only work if you're not constantly reminded that you're living in someone else's space. Sophie studied his face, noting the thoughtful gesture behind his practical words. Thank you. That was kind. An awkward silence settled between them. They were married now, but still essentially strangers learning to share a living space. Now, I have some rules we should discuss, James said, his business persona returning. My work requires confidentiality, so I'll need you to sign additional privacy agreements. I often work late and have early morning calls with international clients. I'll try not to disturb you. What about your social obligations? The reason? You needed a wife in the first place. We have our first event next Friday. It's a charity gala that my company sponsors. You'll need an appropriate dress. Maria can arrange for a personal shopper. Sophie felt her stomach flutter with nervousness. I've never been to anything like that. What if I embarrass you? For the first time since she'd known him, James's expression softened completely. Sophie, you couldn't embarrass me if you tried. Just be yourself. The first test the week passed quietly, as they established routines around each other. Sophie discovered that James left for work before she woke up and returned after she'd usually gone to bed. They were like polite roommates. Sharing meals occasionally but maintaining careful distance, Sophie spent her days visiting her father at the hospital, where the new treatment was already showing promising results. David's color had improved, and his energy was returning. The relief and gratitude she felt reinforced that she had made the right decision, even if the situation felt surreal. "Look different, sweetheart," David observed during one of her visits. "Marriage suits you." Sophie forced a smile, hating that she had to lie to her father. "James takes good care of me. He must, to put that glow in your cheeks. When do I get to meet my new son-in-law properly?" "Soon, Dad. He's been very busy with work, but he's looking forward to getting to know you better." Friday evening arrived with unseasonable speed. Sophie stood before her bedroom mirror, wearing an elegant navy dress that the personal shopper had selected. It was more sophisticated than anything she'd ever owned, and she barely recognized herself. Maria appeared in the doorway with a jewelry box. "Mr. James asked me to give you these." Inside lay a stunning sapphire necklace and matching earrings that probably cost more than Sophie's annual rent. Her hands trembled as she lifted the necklace. "I can't wear something this expensive. What if I lose it?" "Miss Sophie," Maria said gently, helping fasten the necklace. "You're a Harrison now. This is your life. You need to start believing you belong in it." When Sophie emerged from her room, James was waiting in the living room wearing a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He looked up from his phone and went completely still, his eyes widening as he took in her transformed appearance. "You look," he paused, seeming to search for words, "absolutely stunning." Sophie felt heat rise in her cheeks. "The dress is beautiful. And thank you for the jewelry. I'll be very careful with it." "It's yours to keep," James said quietly. "Consider it a wedding gift." The charity gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and Sophie felt like she was walking into a fairy tale. The main hall was decorated with thousands of white flowers and crystal chandeliers, and everyone looked like they had stepped off magazine covers. "Remember," James murmured as they entered, his hand warm on her lower back, "we're happily married." "Try to look like you enjoy my company." Sophie turned to him with a mischievous smile. "That might be the hardest part of this whole arrangement." James's surprised laugh was genuine and warm, drawing curious glances from nearby guests. It was the first time Sophie had heard him truly laugh, and the sound made something flutter in her chest. Unexpected connections as the evening progressed. Sophie found herself genuinely enjoying the event. James was attentive and charming, introducing her two important clients and colleagues with obvious pride. She discovered he had a quick wit and could be quite funny when he relaxed. "Your wife is delightful, James," commented Robert Kim, James's best friend and business partner, during dinner. "Where have you been hiding her?" "Sophie prefers to avoid the spotlight," James replied smoothly. "She's an artist with a real gift." Sophie was surprised by the genuine admiration in his voice when he spoke about her work. Throughout the evening, he had mentioned her art to several people, clearly having paid attention to their conversations about her paintings. During the dancing portion of the evening, James led Sophie onto the floor for a slow waltz. She had expected awkwardness, but his movements were smooth and confident, making her feel graceful in his arms. "You're a good dancer," she observed, allowing him to guide her around the floor. "Mandatory lessons growing up in the Harrison family," he replied, "along with piano, horseback riding, and proper table etiquette." "Sounds lonely," Sophie said softly, noting the wistfulness in his voice. "It was," James admitted, pulling her slightly closer as they turned. "I always envied kids who got to just be kids instead of small adults in training." Sophie looked up into his face, seeing past his polished exterior to the man who had been shaped by duty and expectation rather than love and freedom. "Is that why you work so much? To prove you were worth all that training?" James's steps faltered slightly at her perceptive question. "How did you?" "Artists learn to see beneath the surface," Sophie said gently. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, James. You've already built something incredible. The song ended, but they remained close for a moment longer than necessary, both feeling an unexpected connection that went beyond their business arrangement. The evening spell was broken when a sharp voice cut through their moment. "James, darling, there you are." They turned to see Victoria Harrison approaching, resplendent in black silk and diamonds, her keen eyes already assessing Sophie from head to toe. "Grandmother," James said, his entire posture changing to become more formal and guarded. "I'd like you to meet my wife, Sophie." Victoria extended a perfectly manicured hand. "How charming." "Sophie what, dear?" "Chen," Sophie replied, meeting the older woman's challenging gaze steadily. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Harrison."
Ow.
"Unexpected," Victoria said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "James has always been full of surprises. Tell me, dear, what's your family background?" Sophie felt James tense beside her, but she answered calmly. "My father immigrated from Taiwan and built a small restaurant business. My mother was a teacher before she passed away when I was 16. How... Quaint," Victoria said, managing to make the word sound like an insult. "And what do you do with your time?" "I'm an artist," Sophie replied, lifting her chin slightly. "I paint. A hobby, how nice." "James, we should discuss the quarterly reports next week. I have some concerns about the new product launch." As Victoria glided away, Sophie felt the warmth of the evening drain away. She understood now why James seemed so guarded and driven. Growing up under that woman's critical eye would make anyone feel like they had to constantly prove their worth. "I'm sorry about that," James said quietly. "She's protective of the family reputation." "She doesn't approve of me," Sophie observed. "She doesn't approve of anyone who might make me happy," James replied, then seemed surprised by his own words. Growing closer on the ride home, they sat in comfortable silence, both processing the evening's events. Sophie found herself studying James's profile in the dim light of the car, noting the way he had defended her art to his grandmother and colleagues throughout the night. "Thank you," she said finally. "For what?" "For making me feel like I belonged. There tonight, for talking about my art like it mattered." James turned to look at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Your art does matter, Sophie. You have real talent. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Back at the penthouse, they lingered in the living room, neither quite ready to retreat to their separate spaces. "Would you like some tea?" Sophie offered. "I notice Maria keeps my favorite kind in the kitchen." "She asked me what you might like," James admitted. "I may have had her research your preferences." Sophie laughed. "You researched my tea preferences?" "I research everything," James said with a slight smile. "It's how I make good business decisions." "And am I a good business decision?" Sophie asked, meaning it as a light joke but finding herself genuinely curious about his answer. James was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the soft lamplight. "You're much more than I bargained for," he said finally, his voice unusually soft. Something in his tone made Sophie's heart skip. She realized that somewhere between signing a contract and sharing a dance, this arrangement had become more complicated than either of them had planned. As they said goodnight and went to their separate rooms, both Sophie and James lay awake thinking about blue eyes meeting brown ones across a crowded dance floor, and wondering if a marriage that had started as a business deal might be transforming into something neither of them had expected to find. The next morning would bring new challenges as they continued learning to live together, but tonight had planted seeds of something deeper than convenience between the billionaire and the artist, who had agreed to be his wife 3 months into their marriage. Sophie and James had settled into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. They shared morning coffee before James left for work, discussed their days over dinner when his schedule allowed, and had become comfortable in each other's presence. What neither would admit was how much they looked forward to these quiet moments together. Sophie had thrown herself into her art with renewed passion, using the studio space James had created for her in the penthouse's spare room. Her paintings had evolved, becoming more vibrant and emotionally complex. James often found excuses to pass by the studio, claiming he enjoyed watching her work, though he never interrupted her creative process. "You've been painting a lot of couples lately," Maria observed one morning as she brought Sophie tea in the studio. Sophie looked at her latest canvas, which depicted two figures standing close together against a sunset sky. She hadn't consciously realized the theme that had emerged in her recent work. "I suppose I have," Sophie said thoughtfully. "Marriage makes you think about relationships differently, even marriages of convenience," Maria asked with a knowing smile. Sophie's brush paused, mid-stroke. "What makes you think this is just convenient, Miss Sophie? I've watched Mr. James for 5 years. I've never seen him smile the way he does when you're around. And you light up when he comes home each evening, even when you pretend not to notice." Before Sophie could respond, they heard James's voice from the living room, speaking sharply into his phone. "No, Robert, I don't care what the board thinks about my personal life. The decision is final." Sophie and Maria exchanged glances. James rarely raised his voice, and never about personal matters. "I should check if he needs anything," Sophie said. Setting down her brush, she found James pacing by the windows. His phone call apparently finished, but his agitation still evident in his rigid posture. "Everything all right?" Sophie asked gently. James turned, and Sophie was startled by the storm in his usually controlled expression. "My grandmother called an emergency board meeting. She's questioning my leadership and suggesting that perhaps I'm not suited for long-term company management." "On what grounds?" Sophie felt anger rise on his behalf. "She claims I've become distracted and emotional since getting married. Apparently, several board members have noticed changes in my management style and are concerned." Sophie felt a chill of understanding. "What kind of changes? Been more collaborative with my team? Less aggressive in hostile takeovers? More focused on employee welfare?" James ran his hands through his hair. "Things I thought were improvements, but Victoria sees as weakness." "Those sound like positive changes to me," Sophie said firmly. "Oh, do they?" James looked at her with an expression that made her heart race. "Because I think she might be right about one thing. I have been distracted. I've been thinking about things. Other than quarterly profits and market dominance, like what?" Sophie asked softly, though something in his tone suggested she already knew the answer. James stepped closer, his eyes intense. "Like whether my wife had a good day painting. Like whether she laughed at the comedy show we watched last night because she genuinely found it funny or because she was being polite. Like how she takes her tea and what makes her smile." Sophie felt her breath catch. James ... "I know this wasn't supposed to happen," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "We had an agreement. A business arrangement. But somewhere along the way, I stopped pretending to care about you and started actually caring." The truth comes out before Sophie could respond to James's confession. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed her father's number, but when she answered, it was her sister Emma's panicked voice. "Sophie, you need to come to the hospital right away. Dad collapsed at home. They're running tests, but the doctors want to speak with family immediately." Sophie's face went white, and James immediately moved to her side. "What happened, my father?" Sophie said, grabbing her coat with shaking hands. "I have to go." "I'm coming with you," James said without hesitation. "You don't have to. I know you have that important meeting with the Japanese investors." "Sophie," James said firmly, taking her coat and helping her into it, "nothing is more important than this. Nothing is more important than you." The drive to the hospital was tense, with Sophie fighting back tears while James held her hand, offering silent comfort. When they arrived, they found Emma in the waiting room, her eyes red from crying. "What did the doctors say?" Sophie asked, embracing her younger sister. "They think the cancer has spread," Emma said, her voice breaking. "The experimental treatment was working, but now there are new complications. They want to try a different approach. But ... double quotes. But what?" James asked gently. Emma looked between Sophie and James uncertainly. "The new treatment isn't available here. There's a specialist in Switzerland who's had success with similar cases, but the cost would be enormous. Even with good insurance, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars." Sophie sank into a waiting room chair, overwhelmed. "We can't ask for more. James has already done so much." "What are you talking about?" Emma asked, confused. Sophie realized she had never told her sister the true nature of her marriage, or how her father's initial treatment had been funded. The weight of the lies and secrets suddenly felt crushing. "Emma," Sophie began carefully, "there's something I need to tell you about James and me." James sat down beside Sophie, taking her hand. "Sophie, you don't have to explain anything, right? Now?" "Yes, I do," Sophie said, looking at her sister. "Our marriage, it's not what you think. It's a business arrangement. James needed a wife for professional reasons, and I needed money for Dad's treatment. We're not really in love." Emma stared at them in shock. "What? But you seem so happy together, the way you look at each other. ... The way we look at each other," Sophie repeated, glancing at James. "Sophie," James said quietly, "can we talk privately?" For a moment, he stepped into an empty family conference room, where James closed the door and turned to face her. "What you told your sister about us not really being in love," he began, "is that still true for you?" Sophie felt her heart pounding. "James, this isn't the time. ... This is exactly the time," he said, stepping closer. "Sophie, I meant what I said earlier. Somewhere along the way, this stopped being an arrangement for me. I've fallen in love with you. It's really truly in love." Sophie felt tears spill over. "You can't mean that." "Why can't I?" James asked, gently wiping the tears from her cheeks. "Because we started with a contract? Because I'm supposed to be this cold businessman who doesn't feel anything? Sophie, you've changed everything for me. You've made me remember what it feels like to hope for something beyond the next quarterly report. But what about your grandmother? The board? You said yourself that they think you've become too emotional." "Then maybe it's time I found new board members," James said with determination. "Maybe it's time I stopped living my life according to Victoria Harrison's rules and started living it according to my own heart." Sophie searched his face, seeing nothing but sincerity and love in his eyes. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Of what? Believing this is real? And then losing it? Of thinking someone like you could actually love someone like me?" James cupped her face in his hands. "Sophie Chen Harrison, you are the most talented, compassionate, brave woman I've ever known. You've brought color into my black and white world. You've made me laugh, made me think, made me want to be a better man. How could I not love you?" A new beginning before Sophie could respond. There was a gentle knock on the door. Dr. Martinez, her father's oncologist, peered in. "Mrs. Harrison? I have some updates about your father's condition, and there are some decisions that need to be made quickly." They returned to the waiting room, where Dr. Martinez explained the situation. David's cancer had indeed progressed, but the Swiss specialist had reviewed his case and believed the new treatment protocol could be highly effective. "The challenge," Dr. Martinez said, "is that we need to move quickly, and the cost of transferring him to the clinic and funding the treatment would be substantial." "How substantial?" James asked. "Approximately $800,000, plus ongoing care costs." Emma gasped, but James didn't even blink. "When can we arrange the transfer?" he asked calmly. Sophie stared at him. "James, you can't. We've already asked too much of you." "Sophie," James said, turning to face her with absolute certainty. "Your father is going to be my father-in-law for real now, if you'll have me. Family takes care of family, if I'll have you," Sophie asked, her voice shaking. James got down on one knee right there in the hospital waiting room, taking her hands in his. "Sophie, I know we did this backwards. I know we started with a contract instead of a courtship. But I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you. Will you marry me? For real this time, with love and commitment and all. The messy, wonderful things that come with a real marriage?" Sophie looked down at this incredible man who had somehow become the center of her world, who was offering to save her father's life again and promising to love her forever. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, James, I love you too." As James stood and kissed her in the middle of the hospital waiting room, Sophie realized that Maria had been right. The most beautiful things in life often came when you least expected them, including love that transformed a business arrangement into the greatest romance of their lives. 6 months later, the garden wedding was everything their first ceremony hadn't been: intimate, personal, and filled with genuine joy. Sophie wore a simple white dress she had chosen herself, and James couldn't stop smiling as she walked down the aisle toward him. David Chen, healthy and strong after his successful treatment in Switzerland, walked his daughter down the aisle. With tears of happiness in his eyes, Emma served as maid of honor, and even Victoria Harrison seemed to have softened toward Sophie, perhaps recognizing that her grandson had never been happier. Do you, James? Take Sophie to be your wife too. Love and cherish, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for as long as you both shall live, the minister asked. I do, James said, his voice strong and sure. I've already proven the richer in sickness parts, so I'm confident about the rest. Sophie laughed through happy tears. I do too, and I promise to love you even when you work too late and forget to eat dinner. As they kissed as husband and wife for the second time, but truly for the first, the guests erupted in celebration. Robert Kim wiped away a tear. Maria beamed with satisfaction. And David Chen raised his glass in a toast to the most unexpected love story any of them had ever witnessed. Later, as they danced their first dance as a genuinely married couple in the garden of their new home, Sophie looked up at James with wonder. Do you ever regret how we started? She asked. Never, James replied, spinning her slowly. Because if I hadn't needed a wife, and you hadn't needed help with your father's medical bills, I might never have walked into that little gallery in Brooklyn. I might never have met the woman who would teach me that love is the best business decision I ever made. Sophie smiled, thinking of the painting that had started it all. Love unexpected had been prophetic after all, showing her that the most beautiful things in life could indeed come when you least expected them. Even in the form of a billionaire with a marriage contract and a heart he didn't know he was ready to give away as the stars appeared overhead and their friends and family celebrated around them. Sophie and James held each other close, knowing that their love story would continue to unfold in ways they could never have planned or predicted, but which would always be perfectly, beautifully theirs. The end.